Good morning to the greatest group of people ever. Well, one half of them. We have a great crowd today. There's not very many seats open. This is good to see. It's because of the barbecue later. I know that. We are closing out this morning with our series of lessons throughout the month of August that we do every year on an annual basis as we focus on families. And as you know, in our Bible classes, we're centering on parenting, and here in our Sunday morning lessons, we have been talking all this month about marriage. We've talked about the relationship that God would intend between a husband and wife, the different responsibilities that are important for a healthy marriage, and today we're going to talk about the number one marriage killer. What would you think if you were to just imagine what most marital problems center upon? Well, you might think it's issues of intimacy. And sometimes it is. Or you might think that it's issues of different responsibilities. He takes out the trash and mows the yard and she cleans the house or whatever. And arguments about that. And there are problems in that regard, but not even close to the number one. You might think it might be a lack of compatibility. Well, that's not generally the issue. Everybody's pretty much compatible with everybody and pretty much incompatible with everybody, because marriage is always about a commitment and growing together and learning together. And so it is an issue, but certainly not number one. You might think it's overwork. He works too much. She works too much, or he doesn't work enough, and it's a problem. And sometimes that is, but that's definitely not the number one. You might think it'd be over differing interests. We don't enjoy any of the same things. You know, when you're empty nesters, I can tell you this from recent experience, you've got to try to find television shows you can both watch that have guns and love in them. And let me tell you, that's a challenge. That is a challenge. But that's not the number one thing. The number one thing, by double the number two thing, is money. That's why this morning's lesson is entitled Marriage, Love Over Money. And we all would say, well, I would rather have love than have money. But yet, it breaks apart the majority of marriages. It takes love and it separates that love. The problem usually has very little to do with how much money a couple has. That's what's really strange about it. This affects the poor, the middle class, and it affects the super rich. Across the board, there's not a higher percentage of poor people who have problems in their marriage over money than rich people. It's across the board. So the issue is not really, well, we don't have enough or we have too much. So there's something else going on that's causing this friction, this difficulty. It's about differing priorities. You would not imagine how many times I've had couples come in the office, and when this turns out to be a major problem, one of them's a spender and one of them's a saver. Or one of them thinks, we need to live and enjoy what we have, and the other one thinks, no, we need to have something so we can enjoy it someday. And those issues become a major point of conflict. It can translate into real questions of respect. See, that's what ends up happening. It's not really about how the money is spent. It's about, well, does he respect me in how he spends the money? Does she respect me in how she spends it? It can be an issue of control. He or she is trying to control me through the money. It could be an issue of an expression of love. He doesn't love me. She doesn't love me. They buy gifts for everybody else, but not for me. Or the way he's irresponsible with those funds is not showing love for me. And then it's often communication issues. But the crux of the matter, the catalyst that brings about all these other things, it often has to do with the green in our pocket or the plastic in our wallet or the balance on our account statement. So how do we avoid allowing finances to damage what should be the most precious thing in our life? How do we do that? Well, with this, we've got to turn to the most definitive text in all the Bible about finances. And that's found in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through the end of the chapter in verse 34. Jesus starts out in 19 through 24 and says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. For the lamp of the body is the eye. And therefore, if your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" So the first thing Jesus tells us, and you'll notice this text never mentions marriage. Now, Matthew chapter 6 does. And the Sermon on the Mount talks about it, about the importance of marriage. And one of the key passages about the marriage bond being permanent in this life is found here in the Sermon on the Mount. But this message about finances is an applicable principle that you can apply to everybody's life. And in this first section, he says, we must prioritize investments in eternal things. We all realize that there's nobody who takes a U-Haul hauled behind their hearse. Everybody knows that. You've never seen that. My dad was preaching in California, and they had a Hmong congregation that met in the fellowship hall. I'm not exactly sure where Hmongs are from. I guess Mongolia. Is that where Hmongs are from? China, Mongolia? Okay. So they had a group of them who met there. And so he attended a funeral where the Hmong preacher was preaching the funeral. And my dad, to be supportive and to show love for the family, went to the funeral. And it was interesting because everyone would go by the casket and they'd put money in the casket. And I mean, this casket had piles of $100 bills. That's a cultural thing. My dad said to the funeral director, "Can I write him a check?" Here's the thing. It didn't matter to the fellow who was gone if he had cash or check or credit cards, because guess what? Where he's gone, either way, now this was a Christian, so where he's gone, he's already rich. He doesn't need any of the temporal, meaningless things of this impermanent world anymore. And, you know, we look at the pharaohs, King Tut and his elaborate burial shrine, where he's buried with gold and a gold coffin and all these precious rubies and emeralds and all of the different precious stones. And they thought, well, he'll need these things in the afterlife. Well, if they had heard the words of Jesus and believed them, they would have known better. The things of this world, the houses, the pickups, the cars, the swimming pools, the vacation homes, all of it is meaningless 100 years from now. Right? What will matter in your life 100 years from today? The only person who might possibly, in this audience, have any chance of thinking it could be anything material would be infants that were just born. Maybe. But for all the rest of us, a good way to judge what should be matter in your life is to ask the question, will this matter to me 100 years from today? That's not very long, folks, in the grand scheme of this world. 100 years. It's not very long. But yet when you look at these things that can divide us and tear us apart, the truth is if you use the 100-year scale, none of it matters whatsoever. Everything on this earth will pass away. The only eternal things, here's the thing, You ask, is there anything in this world that'll matter to you in 100 years? Who thinks there's nothing in this world that'll matter to you in 100 years? Well, if you raise your hand, you're almost right, but not quite. There is something in this world that'll matter in 100 years. The only thing in your life that's eternal, people. Your children are eternal. Your spouse is eternal. That's the only thing that'll be here 100 years from now, that'll matter to you. So we need to look at what is truly eternal. People. We fight and we argue over things that have absolutely no lasting value. That's why Jesus says you cannot serve God and mammon. You can't serve God and money. Here's what you're choosing. I'm going to serve the temporary, or I'm going to serve the eternal. I'm going to serve the things that decay, where moth and rust destroy, or I am going to serve things that last. Do you like things that last? When we're going to buy a car or something, I always do the research and look at J.D. Power and Associates or whatever, or Edmunds or wherever I can find the reliability, because I want something that's going to last. The truth is, though, when you're spending money that doesn't last, you're always spending it on things that don't last. Because only 100 years from now, the only thing built to last is sitting right next to you. That's the only thing built to last. And it gives you a different perspective. And so as couples are struggling with this, and they're arguing and fighting, and they're overspending, or they're not paying attention to what they should be spending their money on, they have to ask, who are we serving? The temporary or the eternal? There was a lady named Sandra Ludberg who wrote an article on this. And in the article, she made the statement. She said, people need to analyze why. If the overspending is the issue, they need to analyze why they're doing so. Do you know it's always because of an insecurity in some way? If you're spending more than you have, it isn't that you don't have enough. Lenora and I have noticed, we look back through the years and we say, how did we afford that? We look at our income back years ago when we started our kids in private school at Marshall Bible School. And it wasn't long ago, we were looking through stuff in the basement. I saw one of the old bills. And I'm like, how did I afford that then? We just did. Because we had prioritized it. But don't you ever look back in your life and wonder, how did we ever make it when we had nothing? When Lenora was crawling across, she's still bitter about this, and she's here at early service today, so need to be careful. But when she was 9 months pregnant and we couldn't afford a better car, and she was crawling across from the passenger seat to drive because the door handle wouldn't work on the driver's seat, 9 months pregnant. And we look back on that now, and she was really angry about it then. But now, she is like, she thinks it's pretty funny, it's a great memory. You realize you always make it no matter where you are in life? Haven't you always made it? When you were poor, did you make it? Yeah. When you're well off, you make it. But yet, why do we overspend? Insecurity. Either we think that it'll make us feel better if we buy this thing, or we think that people will see us in a different light if we have this thing. You see, the only reason to spend more than you have, now if you have it, spend it. As long as you've got your priorities right. But the reason we overspend is because there's some kind of hole in our inner person that we're trying to fill. And here's the thing. Cars and trucks and houses and clothes don't fill inner soul holes. They don't fill it. Fleeting gratification should never be chosen over long-term security. When Pompeii was destroyed, when Mount Vesuvius went off and thousands and thousands were just buried instantly, that of course is still a city today. And not long ago they were doing some construction, and of course they're always unearthing ancient artifacts there. And they found the corpse of a lady who was clearly in the process of trying to escape from that terrible eruption, but her hands were clenched around all of her jewels. Let me tell you, don't sink on the Titanic because you're running back to your room to open your safe. There are people who did. There are people who did. Because the things of this world are not worth that fleeting gratification, that just getting what we can get, are not worth choosing that over our long-term, eternal security. Worldly treasures are not a wise investment. You know, there are things in life, we talk about investments. And I've heard folks, say, well, I'm investing in a new automobile. Well, buy a new automobile if you can and if you want it. But it's not an investment. No offense. I know you guys make your living on new automobiles, okay? But it's not an investment. Why? Because you buy it for $30,000 and what's it worth the very next day? Like 24, right? I mean, it just plummets. Why is that? Because it's a depreciating asset. Here's the thing. Everything in this world, even 401ks and IRAs and 403bs and all the things that we call, even real estate, in the grand scheme of things, are depreciating. They're not investments. Investments are things that'll be worth something in the future. I mean in the real future, not 20 years, 100 years. Everything in this world we buy to be used. Now, I'm not saying don't save for the future. You understand. We're simply saying have the right mindset about the material. Jesus goes on in verses 25 through 32. Therefore, I say, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body or what you'll put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, but your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add a cubit to his stature? So why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say to you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore, don't worry, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what shall we wear? For after all these things the gospel seek, the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all of these things. So what we have to remember in our marriages is not only to prioritize eternal things, we have to show gratitude for His generosity and trust it. You see, what is the most valuable thing created by the one who created everything? I think it's appropriate that, we scratch and we save to have a little bit of money in this life, and we look at people with all the millions and millions and billions now these days. And you look and you say, well, what would that buy? There's nothing those people can't buy. Yet if someone, and I've seen these lawsuits through the years, someone dies in an accident and it's because the manufacturer made a mistake, or they hid certain problems with a vehicle, or they die in an accident and it's the other driver's fault and the insurance company's paying through the teeth, and you see these exorbitant settlements, $22 million. I want everybody to understand, there is no amount of money that a jury could award that's worth you. Because you are eternal. And money isn't. There's no amount you can put of value on someone's life. Because the truth is that the creator of the universe made a bunch of temporary stuff, and He made one thing in this world that's eternal. You. Human beings. And we worry so. I love that song, and we didn't coordinate, but Dave is very good about knowing what the scripture reading is and trying to fit with it. But you know, if we count our blessings, that helps us to see things in perspective. Worry does absolutely nothing to resolve things. When it comes to finances or any other area of life, I've had to learn this hard because I think many of you are probably like me. We're planners. We tend towards rubbing our hands and pulling out our hair with things. But I've had to learn, we all need to learn that worry is the most useless emotion that any human being can ever exercise. Because worry, and here are some stats on worry, 40% of everything we worry about have no chance of ever coming to pass. 4 out of 10 things. No chance. Now, a lot of the rest only have 1% chance or 5% chance, but 40% have no chance of ever coming about. 30% of the things we worry about happened in the past, and guess what? There are no time machines. You can't do anything about it. 30%. 10% of the things we worry about relates to our health, and they tell us, the medical community, that worry makes us less healthy. That's like saying, you know, I worry I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, so I think I'll go down to the casino. I mean, that's just dumb. You know? But to worry about your health when worry makes you less healthy, it makes no sense. 8%, they tell us, of all the things we worry about have some legitimacy. But here's the thing, they don't. Because worrying about it still won't change it. Worry never improves what you're worrying about. Never. Let's emphasize it again. Never. So Jesus tells us wisely, don't worry. He says, and why on earth would you worry when your Father made it all? And you are what it was made for, or who it was made for. You see, that doesn't mean we shouldn't use wisdom. I'm not about encouraging people to, well, let's just do what we want and live for today. I'm not meaning that. It's about perspective. You know, however, there is something to this living for today. I was marveling yesterday at how dumb my dog is. I mean, she's real smart as far as dogs go, which means she's about 1/1000th of the dumbest human. But my dog, I take her down and we put her in this kennel, and she has to be locked up when we're not at home, you know, in her kennel. And it's so funny. She knows she's going to be in there, and she wants to be running and doing. And yet, if I just grab a milk bone out of she just goes and gets in the kennel and waits. And I'm like, baby, I'm going to work. You're going to be in here like 8 hours. But she doesn't think about the 8 hours. You know what she thinks about? That bone. And that's it. 1 second of gratification for 8 hours of payment. That's just dumb, you know? But there are people who live that way, aren't there? There are people who live that way. They live for the bone today, the milk bone, and they pay for it year after year after year. That's why debt is so absolutely horrible. Let me tell you, if you don't pay off your credit cards every month, then you need to put them in the freezer or cut them up. The freezer actually works. I've known folks who put it in a baggie and put it in water and freeze it. That way, if there was an emergency and you had to use it, you could thaw it out. But you can't get it out to go buy a dress or a fishing pole. I want to keep this fair. Let me tell you, because the thing is, you know what that is? I'll take the milk bone at 22% interest. Folks, we're smarter than that. God has helped us to have the right priority. Yet, people do that all the time. All the time. You see, sometimes we lack common sense in our finances. And when things are tight, and I'm just going to give you some bare bones, just down to earth, where the rubber meets the road type of real suggestions about finances and marriage. First of all, examine why you fight about money. I have seen this over and over and over. And in fact, I think every marriage has had their discussions about money. And Lenore and I, we had them in the early days. I was never going to fill out first of all, she and I both grew up with very little. She grew up with less than I did, but both of us very little. And so we had different approaches to it, and we fussed about it for many years. Several years ago, we just said, we got to come up with a solution for this, because for me, I'm more of a saver, and Lenora's, you get it. But it was killing me because, you know what? Why would you buy a $400 prom dress when they have them at Goodwill? That's just what I think. That makes perfect sense to me. And she looks at me like I'm absolutely out of my mind when I would say something. My girls are not going to wear a dress from Goodwill. $400, so it's been about 15 years or so. Here's the thing now. You know how we solved it? And Lenore and I haven't had a major argument about money in 15 years. We separated our money. Now, I've heard Christians say, well, Christians, let's be real, folks. I'm never going to be a spender, and she's probably not ever going to be exactly like me. We've become more like each other. But you know what? Our marriage mattered more than whose name was on which checkbook, right? And we just happy. Yesterday, we were at Costco. No, it was Menards later in the day. That story is great, by the way, if you haven't been over there. We were at Menards and we had a basket full of stuff, and I said, well, which parts do you want to pay for? She said, I don't know. And we were arguing over who had the bigger bill. Well, I'll take this. That's too much. No, I'll take that part. I make more than you do, baby. I'll take care of that part, But all of my point is do whatever you got to do, because your marriage matters more than any of that. Far more. Practical things that we have to learn. We have to learn that we need to strive to get out from under the chain of debt. The Dave Ramsey Financial Peace and Steve Diggs' No Debt, No Sweat, and all these programs that have come out, they are so very beneficial. Because the concept, now I won't necessarily say you always have to agree with everything in all of those, but I will say this, the concept of not being a slave to the debtor is as biblical as can be. And it's not just biblical, folks, it's the best way to live. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender. Here's the thing, those will always be true. Always. No matter what governmental system, even communism, the experiments that have happened with that have proven it, the rich will always rule over the poor. It's just the way it's always going to be. Not because I'm advocating one system or another. That's what the Bible says. The rich always rule over the poor. But it's also true, and it will always be true, that the borrower is always a slave to the lender. Always a slave to the lender. So work to get out of the chains of debt. And once you do, I'll tell you, there'll be more peace than before. Number 3, pursue healthy counsel. If you're having struggle in your marriage with this, talk to people who figured it out, not people who haven't. Sometimes the people, ladies, if your girlfriends are buying Louis Vuitton purses all the time too and you don't know how, they're probably not a good person to talk about your money issues. You know what I mean? Fellas, your buddies who always have the newest bass boat and trade in the truck every year. And you know they don't make any more than you do, and you can't afford those things. Probably not the best person to talk to. Talk to someone who can help you, who knows differently. And fourthly, examine your giving. I'll tell you, giving is always a blessing to the believer. Always a blessing. I mean, and it's always a struggle. It is, because it takes faith to give. You have to take money that could be going to paying off debt, or could be going to better, nicer things, or could be going to, there's always needs with your children, and you have to allot that intentionally for a purpose that, according to the world's view of things, has no benefit. But oh, what a benefit. You're investing in heavenly things. It always, always is a blessing. And then fifthly, learn the beauty of contentment. A lot of the things that we've talked about here I struggle with. But and we're all tempted by different things, right? Some of us are strong in some areas, some of us are weak in others. Well, one of the areas I've been strong in, and the kids love to tease me about it, is that I've been a fairly content person. And what I mean by that is, I told you, Lenore and I grew up with not a lot. And so I just kind of think what I have is the best there is. I got the prettiest wife in the world. Smartest kids. Nicest house. Best cars. You see what I mean? No, I'm not bragging about those. I'm simply saying, because I don't literally have the nicest house. I literally have the prettiest wife, but not the nicest house. Not the best cars. But there is a way you can train your mind, folks, to be totally excited about what you have. I want my kids to grow up, and I want them to have what they want, but more than that, I want them to want what they have. Too many folks are dissatisfied because they have a lot of wants, but they don't want what they have. They want what they don't have. Learn to want what you have. You do that, you count your blessings. You realize how much you have that you didn't have before. You realize how blessed you are to have what you have. You count your blessings. And the last thing Jesus explains in this text in the last few verses, seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Put Him first. Trust in His provision. And know that God will take care of you. William Barclay said, those who feed their hearts on the record of what God has done in the past will never worry about the future. Just look back through your memories. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. So all I have to ask you as we close this morning, what is going to matter in 100 years? And here's the answer. Ladies, it's Him. Men, it's her. And the rest of it is extremely flammable. If you need to come this morning, we can help you in this area or any area of your life. Let us wrap our arms around you. I promise you, there's nobody in this auditorium that hadn't had this issue, right? Rich, poor, in the middle. Everybody's had this issue. Don't waste your time focusing. And don't sacrifice your marriage because of flammable things. Come right now as we stand and as we sing.